The smell of butter tarts and fresh coffee was still hanging in the air when my brother walked through the front door with a woman none of us had ever met. It was the Saturday before Thanksgiving, the kind of October afternoon in Nova Scotia, where the maples outside had gone fully red and the light through the kitchen window turned everything amber. My mother had been cooking since 7 in the morning. My father had driven 4 hours from Truro just to be there. And I was standing at the counter in my husband's old cardigan, pretending I wasn't anxious about any of it. My brother, I'll call him by what our family calls him, which is just my brother, because that's how he's always existed in the story of our lives, had been gone for almost 2 years. Working up in Fort McMurray, he'd said. Oil patch work. Good money, long hours, not a lot of cell service. We'd gotten used to the silence. We'd told ourselves it was normal. And then he called in September and said he was coming home for Thanksgiving and he had someone he wanted us to meet. Her name was Claire. She was 31, she said when my mother asked over the phone. She worked in finance. She seemed lovely, my brother said. He seemed genuinely happy, which was something none of us had heard in his voice for a long time. My husband, James, is a forensic accountant with the RCMP. We met in Halifax 10 years ago at a mutual friend's housewarming. He is quiet, careful, and exceptionally good at noticing when numbers don't add up, not just on paper, but in people. It's not a quality that makes dinner parties easy. It's a quality that, twice in our marriage, has quietly saved someone we care about from making a catastrophic mistake. I didn't think about any of that when I heard my brother's boots on the porch steps. I was just happy he was home. Claire came in behind him carrying a bottle of Nova Scotia wine and a box of chocolates from a shop in downtown Halifax that I recognized immediately because I'd driven past it 100 times and never been able to afford anything inside. She was poised, professionally warm in a way that made me think she was good at meeting people's families. She shook my mother's hand, complimented the house, found the right thing to say to my father about the drive. By the time we were all seated at the table, she had somehow made herself comfortable without making anyone else uncomfortable, which is a skill I've spent 32 years trying to develop and still haven't fully managed. My brother sat next to her and I watched his posture change. He sat straighter. He laughed more easily. When she touched his arm, he looked at her like someone who had recently stopped being afraid of something. I thought, whatever happened up in Fort McMurray, she happened too. And maybe that's enough. James sat across from me. At some point in the first hour, maybe 40 minutes into dinner, I noticed him go quiet. Not the quiet of someone bored or tired. The other kind. The kind where he's listening to something specific and filing it away. I didn't ask him about it at the table. The meal went well. My mother's tortilla was perfect, as it always is. My father told the same 3 stories he tells every Thanksgiving, and my brother laughed at all of them, the way you only laugh when you've been away long enough to miss even the repetition. Claire asked my father about his work with genuine interest. She knew things about the industry that surprised him, and he visibly warmed to her by the time we got to dessert. It was a good evening. I kept telling myself that. After dinner, while my mother and Claire were in the kitchen, and my father had fallen asleep in the armchair the way he always does, my brother and James went outside to the back deck. I could see them through the sliding glass door. My brother was smoking, something I hadn't seen him do since his 20s, and James was standing with his hands in his pockets nodding. I told myself they were just talking. It was almost 11 when everyone left. My brother and Claire were staying at a hotel downtown, which I thought was a little unusual. We had a guest room, but Claire had mentioned she liked having her own space when she traveled, and I didn't push it. James was quiet on the drive back to our place, not cold, just contained. I let it sit until we were inside and I had my coat off and a glass of water in my hand. Then I said, "What is it?" He looked at me for a moment. He does this thing where he considers the weight of a sentence before he decides to say it out loud, like he's checking it for structural integrity. She said she worked in investment portfolio management for a firm in Calgary, he said. She named the firm. Okay, I said. I know that firm, he said. I worked in adjacent file 3 years ago. That firm closed in 2021. Regulatory issues. It no longer exists. I stood there with my glass of water and felt the warmth of the evening drain out of the kitchen in about 4 seconds. She could have been there before it closed, I said. She could have, James said. She also said she managed high net worth portfolios for clients across Western Canada. She used a phrase, not the concept, the exact phrase, that I've seen in 2 separate fraud disclosures. James, I'm not saying anything definitive, he said. I'm saying I'd like to look into it before your brother makes any major financial decisions with this woman. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and had the exact argument with myself that I always have when the truth and loyalty to someone I love are standing on opposite sides of a room, asking me to choose. My brother had been through so much. Our family had watched him lose a business in his late 20s. A contracting company he'd built from nothing that went under during a bad winter, with 2 failed projects and a partner who disappeared with the operating account. He'd spent 3 years rebuilding himself from the ground up. Fort McMurray had been part of that. Coming back with Claire had felt like the final piece, and here was James, quietly, carefully, suggesting that the final piece might not be what it appeared. I wanted to be angry at him. I tried to find the angle where this was about him being suspicious by profession, seeing patterns that weren't there, defaulting to distrust because that's what his work had trained him to do. But I have known James for 10 years. In 10 years, he has flagged exactly 3 things that felt intrusive or unwelcome in the moment. All 3 turned out to be real. I got up at 2 in the morning and sat in the kitchen. He came and found me at 2:30. We sat across from each other at the same table where we'd had Thanksgiving dinner, and he told me what he'd found in 2 hours of quiet searching after I'd gone to bed. He hadn't accessed anything he wasn't authorized to access. He'd used public records, professional registries, and a database available to anyone with a law enforcement affiliation. Claire's name appeared in a civil litigation filing from 2022, a couple in Red Deer. Both retired, combined savings of around $400,000 had named her in a lawsuit alleging she had misrepresented her credentials, her firm's legitimacy, and the nature of the investment products she was selling them. The case had been settled out of court. The settlement terms were sealed. There was a second name on the filing, a business partner who had also been named. That name had a different last name but the same first name as someone who had been charged. Not convicted, charged, in a separate matter in British Columbia the following year. I sat very still while James talked. I could be looking at 2 different people, he said. Common names. Coincidences happen. But the firm she named tonight doesn't exist. That's not a coincidence. She might not know it closed, I said. One more attempt. He looked at me gently. She described managing client portfolios there as recently as last spring. I thought about my brother on that deck, smoking a cigarette, looking more settled than I'd seen him in years. I thought about the way he'd said her name on the phone in September, the particular softness in it. I thought about the $400,000 the couple in Red Deer had lost. I thought about my brother's savings, which I didn't know exactly but knew weren't much, because he'd spent 3 years paying off the debt from the contracting collapse, and Fort McMurray money is good, but it's not recover everything money in 2 years. Okay, I said. I need you to be the one to talk to him, James said. Not me, not yet. I don't have enough to make a formal report, and even if I did, he needs to hear this from you first. He's going to think I'm trying to ruin this for him. Maybe, James said. Or maybe he already has questions he hasn't let himself ask. I called my brother the next morning and asked if he could meet me for coffee without Claire. I kept my voice neutral. I said I just wanted some sibling time before they drove back to the city. He agreed easily, which told me he didn't suspect what was coming. We met at a Tim Hortons on the edge of town. Not because it's special, but because it's ours. The one we used to walk to from our parents' house when we were teenagers. The one where he told me about his first real girlfriend, and I told him about my first real heartbreak. It seemed right to do this there. He was already in a booth when I arrived. 2 large double-doubles on the table, his hands wrapped around one of them. I sat down. I looked at my brother, 40 years old, a little gray at the temples now, wearing the same kind of plaid jacket he's been wearing since he was 22. My brother, who built something and watched it fall apart and got up and drove himself to the other end of the country and came back standing. I said, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you say anything. He went very still. Is it Mom and Dad? No, I said. No, everyone's fine. It's about Claire. The stillness changed. A different kind. I talked for 20 minutes. I told him everything James had found. I told him about the firm, about the litigation in Red Deer, about the timeline that didn't hold up. I didn't editorialize. I didn't tell him what to think. I laid it out the way James had laid it out for me at the kitchen table at 2:30 in the morning, piece by piece, with all the gaps acknowledged, all the places where it could still be coincidence named, honestly. When I finished, he sat there for a long time without saying anything. Then he said, "She asked me last week if I wanted to look at an investment opportunity she was putting together, a group of her private clients. She said the minimum buy-in was $25,000. The coffee in front of me went cold while neither of us spoke. She said I didn't have to decide right away, he said. She said she'd have paperwork for me to look at when we got back to Calgary." He rubbed a hand over his face. I watched him do the same thing I'd done the night before, reach for the version of events where this wasn't real, find out there wasn't one, put it down. "She seems so real," he said, "not defensive, just honest. She might still have a real version," I said. "We don't know everything yet." "But you think—" "I think you shouldn't give her $25,000 until James can look into it more thoroughly," I said. "That's all I think right now." He nodded slowly. He picked up his coffee. He put it down without drinking it. "I was going to do it," he said quietly. "I was going to say yes. I've been saving for 2 years and I was going to give her $25,000 because she looked at me and made me feel like I was finally somewhere safe. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say to that. I just sat there across from my brother in the Tim Hortons we've been coming to since we were 16 and let him have the moment, the weight of it, the particular grief of a near miss that you get to feel only because someone caught you in time." He confronted Claire that afternoon in their hotel room. He didn't tell me the details right away. I think he needed to hold that conversation privately for a while before he could hand it over to someone else. But he called me 3 hours later and his voice was different. Flatter. Washed out. "She denied the Red Deer thing at first," he said. "Then I told her James was RCMP and that he had pulled the civil filing and her name was on it." "What did she say?" "She said the couple had misunderstood the nature of the investment. She said it was a civil matter and it was settled and she'd done nothing criminal." "Okay." "Then I asked her if the firm she worked for still existed," he said, "and she was quiet for a long time. And then she said things are complicated in the financial industry and structures change." He paused. "I asked her straight out if she was licensed to sell investment products in Alberta," he said. "She said she worked with a network of licensed partners. I asked if she was personally licensed. She changed the subject. I asked him how it ended. She left," he said. "She packed her bag and she called a car and she left. She didn't ask about the 25,000. She just left." I think that told him what he needed to know more than anything else she'd said. James filed a report the following week. Not a full criminal complaint, because the evidence wasn't there yet, but a notification to the relevant securities authority flagging the firm name, the litigation history, and the encounter. He told my brother that this kind of thing is difficult to prosecute and often doesn't go anywhere, and my brother said he understood, and that wasn't really the point. "The point is, the couple in Red Deer," my brother said. "If she did that to them, she's doing it to other people." I thought that was maybe the most clear-eyed thing I'd heard him say in a long time. My mother called me a few days later. She'd heard some of it from my father, who'd heard it from me. She was quiet on the phone in the way she gets when she's processing something that upsets her sense of how the world should work. "She seemed so genuine," my mother said. "She probably is genuine in some ways," I said. "I don't think that's a contradiction." My mother was quiet again. "I'm glad James said something," she finally said. "I'm glad you listened. My brother came back for Christmas that year alone, and we didn't talk about Claire directly. We talked around her, the way you talk around a bruise that's still tender. He was okay. Not the way he'd been okay at Thanksgiving, sitting up straight next to her laughing easily, but okay in a quieter, more honest way. like someone who had taken a hit and assessed the damage and decided to keep going anyway. On Boxing Day, when everyone else had gone to bed, he and I sat in the kitchen with tea and the leftover shortbread my mother makes every year, and he said, "I think I knew something was off. I think I knew, and I talked myself out of it because I wanted it to be real." "That's not a character flaw," I said. "That's just being human." "Still," he said. "Still," I agreed. We sat there for a while in the quiet of the house, the snow coming down outside the kitchen window, the maple tree out front gone bare and gray. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "I know it wasn't easy." "It was the hardest phone call I've made in a long time," I said. He nodded. He broke a piece of shortbread in half and handed me the bigger piece, the way he's been doing since we were children and there was only one left. Some things don't change, even when everything else does. James never said "I told you so." Not once. Not even in the quiet way some people do it, with a look, with a pause, with a particular kind of restraint that communicates the thing without saying it. He asked about my brother at Christmas, and he was warm and genuine, and he drove 4 hours to be there without complaint. When I thanked him, at the end of the night, for what he'd done, for saying something when it would have been easier not to, for trusting me to handle it, for not making it about himself. He said what he always says when I make too much of the careful, decent things he does. He said, "That's what I'm here for." I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about what it means to be the person in someone's life who says the hard thing when there's still time for it to matter. It's not a comfortable role. It costs something every time. It asks you to risk the warmth of the moment for the sake of what comes after. But I think about the couple in Red Deer. I think about their retirement savings. I think about how many people there must be sitting across from someone who seems so real, so genuine, so exactly what they needed, and nobody in the room is saying anything. I think about my brother handing me the bigger piece of shortbread. Some things, if you're lucky, you catch before they're gone. I've thought a lot about what would have happened if James had said nothing that night. It wouldn't have taken anything dramatic. Just silence. Just the easier choice. Finish the wine. Clear the plates, tell himself it wasn't his place. My brother would have driven back to the city with Claire. He would have signed paperwork he didn't fully understand. He would have handed over $25,000 to a woman whose credentials dissolved the moment someone looked directly at them. And he would have done it willingly, happily, because he trusted her. And because he'd spent 2 years rebuilding himself and finally felt like he was somewhere safe. That's the part that stays with me. Not the fraud. Not the civil filing, not the firm that no longer existed. The part that stays with me is how close it came, how ordinary the evening felt, right up until it didn't. I think about the choices that led Claire to that Thanksgiving table. Years of small decisions that compounded, a willingness to let a convincing performance substitute for honest work, a pattern of finding people at their most hopeful and most vulnerable and stepping into that opening. Every action has a weight. Not a mystical weight, not a cosmic ledger somewhere tallying things up, just the practical, accumulating consequence of who you choose to be over time. Claire had made herself into someone who could sit in my mother's kitchen, compliment the house, charm my father, and look my brother in the eyes with warmth that wasn't real. That didn't happen overnight. It was built, choice by choice, into something she couldn't walk back from easily. And James had made himself into someone who noticed. That didn't happen overnight either. It was years of careful attention, of taking accuracy seriously, of refusing to let discomfort be a reason to stay quiet when something mattered. When he sat across from me at 2:30 in the morning and laid out what he'd found, he wasn't performing. He was just being exactly who he'd always been, in a moment that happened to require it. I think that's what integrity actually looks like in practice. Not a grand gesture. Not a dramatic confrontation, just a person who has spent years developing the habit of honesty, showing up as themselves when the stakes are real. My brother had to find his own version of that in that hotel room. He had to sit across from someone he genuinely cared about and ask the questions he already suspected the answers to. That took something. It would have been easier to accept her explanations, to give the ambiguity the benefit of the doubt, to protect the feeling over the fact. He didn't, and I think the reason he didn't is that somewhere in the years of rebuilding, The hard years, the Fort McMurray years, the years of paying off debt and starting over. He developed enough self-respect to know that the truth, however unwelcome, was something he could survive. He'd survived harder things already. That's the thing about going through difficulty, honestly. It builds a kind of quiet resilience that you don't always notice you have until a moment asks for it. I'm not glad the situation happened. I'm glad we were paying attention. I'm glad James said something. I'm glad I made the phone call. I'm glad my brother asked the questions. Sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone you love is refuse to look away.